Today we're going to talk a little bit about diminished chords. Now, the very definition of diminished means less than whole. As you can imagine, this does wonders for the self-esteem of a diminished chord, being that its name is literally pointing out its shortcomings, which makes it no surprise that diminished chords sound so unstable because of this glaring lack of self-esteem. So I thought we'd kind of break down what they mean, and hopefully they will be more easily understood when to use them, what they are, etc., etc. Now, there are three types of diminished chords. There's a diminished triad, a half diminished, or minor 7 flat 5 chord, or a full diminished chord, which is also known as a diminished 7th chord. So let's start with a diminished triad. Again, a triad is just a 3-note chord. So a diminished triad would be a minor chord with a flat 5. Now, what does that mean? Let's take an A right here, right? So A minor is a C, and an E. If you play them together, make a chord, is a nice minor sounding chord. Now, if we were to flatten the 5 being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right here, this E, if we were to flatten it, it'd make an E flat, right? So an arpeggio for a diminished triad in A would be a C, and an E flat. Now, we can put that together as a chord, starting with the root note here, and it would look like this. We'd have the A on the 5th fret of the E string, the C on the 3rd fret of the A string, and then the E flat right here. But look at that. That's, oh my god, that's ridiculous, okay? So I think especially like in rock music, diminished triads will be more used between just using the flat 5 as its own thing between the one. So I'll demonstrate that right now. Now, if we just take a power chord, right, an A power chord, and we kind of just do like a rock chug, we can flatten the 5 just by taking your ring finger, going to your middle finger like this. So we're taking a chord and we're making it less stable by altering the relationship between the 1 and the 5, which is like the strongest relationship in music, right? So we're altering it. Now, technically, I don't have the minor 3rd in this chord. I've just taken a 2-note thing. So one thing you can do with diminished chords is you can take existing chords and make them less stable and add a lot of tension just by flattening the 5. Now, if we want to take a more appropriate hand position for a chord that is technically a diminished triad, you would do an inversion. So let's do that same thing where we're going to do an A, a C, and an E flat, but let's start with the C. Now, this is a really great lesson in intervals, right? So a diminished chord is essentially stacked intervals. What that means is an interval is just a space between 2 notes. So with an A, we have a 3-note interval, also known as a minor 3rd, right? Now, a minor 3rd from a minor 3rd will end up giving you that flat 5. That's why that first kind of voicing we did, we're just going from 5E to 3A, and down a string back 2 frets is a way to get to a minor 3rd. If you just repeated that here, minor 3rd, minor 3rd. We're stacking these intervals on top of each other, but we're going to do it now in a way that makes more sense by doing an inversion where we play the 3rd first. So the C is going to be first. We're going to have the C here. We're going to have the flat 5 of the A here. There's that minor 3rd again. But we're going to take the octave A here. So the diminished triad voicing we're going to learn looks like this. And now just remember, your root note is actually where your middle finger is. So you can kind of take a root note that you know. Maybe if you know this is a G, you can play its triad by octaving down and then making that chord, just like that, right? So those are diminished triads. And again, we're just taking 2 minor 3rds and stacking them on top of each other. Now the next type of diminished chord would be a half diminished, more commonly known as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Now I'm going to link to a video I did on just minor 7 flat 5 chords, but again, I think these are some of the prettiest diminished chords. Like for example, here's a B minor 7 flat 5. Now the reason it's called half diminished is because we're taking those minor 3rds, but then we're adding an interval that's not a minor 3rd, right? So in a half diminished minor 7 flat 5 chord, we're just taking a minor 7 chord and we're flattening the 5. So it's a cool name of a chord because it's telling you exactly what you're doing. Now these are really good in not just jazz progressions, but used as like passing tones. Now the half diminished chord, the minor 7 flat 5 chord, occurs on the 7th note of any scale, right? So in the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So in the key of C, B half diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5, would be the chord that you could use the natural extension in the key. So what does that mean? Let's take a progression where we just go from a C major to an A minor and back to a C. Right? To kind of create a little bit more tension and release, as they call it in chord progressions, we're going to add that half diminished minor 7 flat 5 chord in there on the B, right? So we need a voicing for that. And the voicing we're going to use is an A string rooted voicing that looks like this. So my root note is on the B. The next note is going to be the D string, 3D, 2G with my middle finger, and my pinky is going to be on the D, which is 3B, right? So it would be 2, 3, 2, 3. Not really a super difficult voicing, but it has a cool sound to it. Now, this is going to naturally resolve as this is the 7th chord in a key. It's going to naturally resolve on the 1. And again, this is the key of C, so. Now, if we added it in that progression like we did before, between the A and the C, it's going to create more tension that's going to be released with the C. So we have A. Which sounds a lot better than just, I mean, better is relative, obviously, but half diminished chords are used as passing chords. You can connect any 2 chords, even if it's not in the key, right? Like, let's just say I'm gonna go from like a C major 7 into like a D minor 7. I'm kind of skipping this note right here, right? So let's say I'm going back and forth. So it's a different type of tension. It's not something that resolves on the 1, but you can always use it in passing. So I just threw that minor 7 flat 5 chord on the note in between, and it kind of just added something a little bit different, right? Now this is going to take us to our third type of diminished chord, which is a diminished 7th chord, otherwise known as a full diminished chord. Now, this is actually a pretty interesting chord, and this also comes from stacking intervals. So the first triad we did, we stacked minor thirds on top of each other. They gave us 3 notes, a triad. Now this is going to be a 7th chord, so it's going to be 4 notes, but all stacked in minor thirds. So let's play this on just 1 string, the open E string, right? So if we start with the E and do a minor third, we go 3 frets higher to a G. We go a minor third from there, 3 frets higher. B flat or A sharp. 3 frets, another minor third from here. C sharp or D flat. Now go another minor third from here, and we end up right where we started, on an E. So the interesting thing about this is there's only 12 notes in music. And if you go 3 notes at a time, you'll start with 1 note, 3 notes, 3 notes, 3 notes, and you're back to where you started. So the interesting thing about diminished 7th chords is that 1 chord voicing could actually be 4 different chords, because if you keep circularly going through minor thirds, where you started is really kind of inconsequential, right? This will make more sense in a second. So let's learn a voicing for a diminished 7th chord. And since we already know the A string voicing of a minor 7 flat 5 chord, it's really easy. You just take that voicing and you move it down 1 string. So I have my pointer finger on the D string 2, my ring finger on the G string 3, my middle finger on the B string 2, and my pinky on the high E string 3. Now, I can perceive any one of these 4 notes as being my root note, because as I cycle through, they're just gonna, you can look at them as inversions because they're all the same chord. Okay, so if I move this down 3 frets, 1, 2, 3, I'm getting the same 4 notes that I did here, just in a different order. So here's the first diminished 7th. I'm gonna move it up a minor third from, I can think of it as like the 2nd fret to the 5th fret, 2 to 5 to 8 to 11, and then I go back another minor third, go up another minor third, and I end up an octave higher than where I started. So it's a really unique chord because you can just kind of cycle through the inversions, and the same chord can have 4 different names, and it's just how you're perceiving the root note. Now, this actual stacking of intervals, and again, let's just look at a real quick arpeggio, right? If we were just to take anything, right? If we took like a D, and we wanted to make a D diminished 7th, we could just stack minor thirds on top of each other. So start here, go to here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the next time I would go up minor third, I'd end up back on a D note, right? So it's a good way to kind of connect a note to each other. Now, no individual major scale key has all of these same 4 notes in them. So it creates a really kind of just more tension, really. Now, another interesting way to look at that is its relationship to the dominant 7 chord. So stay with me here, right? If you take any kind of dominant 7 chord, like let's just take the A string voicing of that D, right? So a D7. If you drop the root note, or actually raise it, if you raise it a half step, you get a diminished 7. So the way I kind of like to look at diminished 7ths is I'll take a chord I'm already very familiar with, right? Like a D7. You might even know this voicing, where the open D string is our root note. If we just raised that a half step, a semitone, we'd end up with that voicing we just learned. So I kind of like to see diminished 7th chords as just an alteration of a dominant 7th chord. And what you can do there is you can use that in different chord progressions. So let's just take something like a D7 to an E minor 7 to an A, and then back to a D, right? Now, I can easily alter this D7 to make it a diminished 7th chord by just raising that root chord, or the root note. So it's a very jazzy type thing to do. I'm starting with a D7. I'm raising the root, which now, this is my new root for diminished 7th chord. So I can look at this as like a D sharp diminished 7th, an E flat diminished 7. So D7, E flat diminished 7, E minor 7 to an A, and back to the D. There's a lot of different things you can do. So on top of this voicing that we did for a diminished 7, we also have another one in the A string where you can just think of a voicing you may already be familiar with, a dominant 7 voicing with a raised root note, right? So it ends up looking just like this. Anyways, you can really feel free to plug these into any spot. The cool thing about diminished chords is they kind of sound unstable, right? They sound a little strange because it's almost like you're going out of the key even if you're staying in the key. So it's a really great thing to do, to kind of just experiment, throw it on any root note, see how it sounds, and then kind of search for the resolution, because there are kind of different types of resolution that you can achieve depending on the chord progression in question. So just learn a couple voicings and then just throw them on different root notes, and kind of you'll really develop an ear for how you want diminished chords to sound, whether they're triads, whether they're minor 7 flat 5 chords, whether they're full diminished 7th chords, and just kind of experiment with them, and your own ears are going to kind of make these different connections. And really, once you know about kind of the construction of the diminished chords, you'll start seeing them more in all types of music, not just jazz, and even just kind of like pieces of it, like that, like the relationship between a root and a flat 5. Like right now, again, the arpeggio, remember, for the diminished triad was an A, a C, and an E flat. You can just kind of take pieces of it. Like first take the flat 5 relationship, and then take the third to the flat 5, which is just a minor third. And there's really no limit to what you can do with diminished chords, but now that you know how they're constructed, a couple of different ways in which you can use them, hopefully we can start getting this diminished chord self-esteem back up to where it belongs, and have it be a very easy to use and well executed addition to anybody's chord vocabulary.